Hi everyone. So before we start, I'd like you to meet two characters. So meet Ted. Ted is a skilled freelance software developer. He enjoys front-end web development. So Ted is hired as a contractor for a direct-to-consumer stationery company. The company gives him the freedom to build an immersive experience with little supervision. Ted makes bold use of color in his development. He spends a lot of time working on visual effects like glass morphism. Ted ships the site and is proud of what he's built, and the company is also happy. So let's meet Tessa. So Tessa is a university lecturer and is on the hunt for a new journal to do lesson planning. Tessa finds the direct-to-consumer stationery site that Ted works for and is entranced by the playful design and the high-quality products she finds. She finds a notebook that she loves, and when she tries to select her specifications for the notebook, she's shocked to find that the color options aren't labeled. Now, you see, Tessa has a type of color blindness, and she can't really tell the difference between red and green. Because the site doesn't have labeled colors, Tessa can't tell what shade of notebook she'd be buying. The whole experience makes her feel excluded and disregarded, and Tessa decides to take her business somewhere more inclusive. Unfortunately, the disconnect that we just observed between Ted's choices and Tessa's experience is all too common. Closing this disconnect is what web accessibility is all about, and that's what I'd like to share with you today. So we'll talk more about inclusive web development, building for the margins. Hi everyone, I'm Clifford Ouma. I am a front-end web developer and a user experience designer. I'm also a big community enthusiast. So what I'll be sharing, so today I'll share about accessibility, equity, equality, inclusivity. Like what's the difference between these terms? I'll also talk about the state of accessibility. I'll talk about building for the margins and conclude my presentation. So accessibility, equity, equality, inclusivity, like what's the difference between this? So let's demystify. There's a thin line between accessibility and inclusivity. So accessibility focuses on the ability, while inclusivity focuses on perspective and personal identifiers. So basically, accessibility is developing for people with various abilities, and inclusivity is all about developing while taking into account the perspective and the different personal identifiers that people have. Now, however, inclusivity should always extend to people's abilities. We should always ensure that everything that we build, and if we're taking into account inclusivity, we should extend to people's abilities also. Let's look at the next two terms, equality and equity. So although they sound the same, equality and equity are quite different. So equality is all about giving each individual the same amount of resources, regardless of their ability or circumstance. However, equity is all about giving exact resources while taking into account their circumstances and their abilities, and helping each person reach the same goal. Equity is subjective and changes from person to person. Now, let's look at the state of accessibility. How far are we? So I'll share some stats. So about 13% of the world's population have some form of disability. That's almost 1 billion people. To break it down further, nearly one in eight people around the world have some form of disability. Now, from a survey conducted by the Webben Foundation, it was found that averagely 50.8 accessibility errors were recorded per page. However, this was a 1.1 decrease from the previous year. It's far from perfect, but there is progress. So the complication. So what complication rises when we are looking at web accessibility currently? So over the period of the COVID pandemic, there has been a rising number of self-taught developers. This is mainly due to the expansion of online learning and the different platforms that offer various resources for people to learn. So this led to democratization of resources and learning, making it easy and accessible to every person with a computer and internet to access these resources. However, the problem that arises with this and the complication is that some key topics may not be covered. So through these different online learning resources that people go through and the variations that exist between them, some key topics that are really important might not be covered. So for example, I, for one, never learned about accessibility. There was so much to learn in web development, so many new technologies popping up every time. And I felt like accessibility was just another thing to learn. However, I feel like it's time we prioritize accessibility, and it's time we share more and ensure that accessibility is at the forefront of every person. So it's upon us to learn and share more about accessibility with others. Doing this ensures that every product that is built by even self-taught developers considers accessibility and is inclusive of every person. Building for the margins. What is building for the margins? So building for the margins, who are these people who are in the margins first? So the margins are people who are from traditionally excluded groups, and building for the margins centers around keeping these traditional excluded groups top of mind, taking them into consideration and ensuring that we look at these traditional excluded groups as we're developing. So it also involves being aware of the best case and the worst case scenarios. So looking at the best case and worst case scenarios with regards to these traditional excluded groups, how best can we help out? And considering these scenarios ensures that our plans cover all the scenarios that might arise and are inclusive. So building for accessibility is a tide that lifts all ships. What do I mean by that? So if you build with these traditional excluded groups at the top of mind, or these people at the margins, if you build with the margins first, you ensure that it helps every person. So it makes sure that your product is inclusive to every person, regardless of their abilities and personal identifiers. So developing plans for those who are on the margins first ensures a strong framework to support inclusivity and ensures that your product is inclusive in all ways. So how can we build for the margins? It's simple. Accessible first development. So by accessible first development, I mean we should take accessibility as the first priority when we're developing. Accessibility should not be an afterthought. It should not be bolted on, but rather it should be built from the product from start. So how do we make our sites accessible? So first of all, we need to follow the official guidelines. So the official guidelines that exist in web accessibility are two. There's the WCAG 2.1 and there's the section 508. However, the WCAG 2.1 is more commonly used and is universally applicable. So all the guidelines that are within the WCAG 2.1 are similar to the ones that are in section 508. So if you meet WCAG 2.1, you meet section 508. So we need to avoid common accessibility mistakes. So some of the always check for common accessibility mistakes, and some of them include low contrast text. By contrast, it means that you need to ensure that the foreground stands out from the background. Missing language attribute that makes a big issue for people who are using screen readers. Screen readers need to know what language the website is written on. empty links. There's also missing form labels, which is common in many sites, and wrong alt text. So the alt text should describe meaning and purpose of an image rather than describing the image literally. So remember Ted and Tessa? So if Ted had looked at the official guidelines and some of the common accessibility mistakes, he would have noticed that in WCAG 2.1, there is a guideline that touches on sensory characteristics, ensuring that we put labels on anything that we leave that regards senses in terms of feeling, hearing, touching, and seeing. With the change of time, there has been a lot of automation in terms of testing accessibility. So currently, there are a lot of tools that can be used to test your accessibility automatically. So the ones that I share here are just out of personal preference, but there are many others out there which are good. So some of them include the Lighthouse. There's also the Wave browser extension. There's the PA11Y CLI and the Axco CLI. Those ones are for people who know how to use the command line interface. So in conclusion, it is human nature that binds us. Empathy is the ability to emotionally understand what other people feel and see things from their own point of view. We should show more empathy to everyone, regardless of their ability and personal identifier. Accessibility as a whole is good for both abled users and those who are differently abled also. So the main message that I want to pass across today is that building for the margins is important to every person. It is beneficial and it is very possible to implement. Remember, building for the margins covers accessibility and inclusivity. It makes sure that accessibility is top of mind and not having it bolted on, but rather having it built from the start. Thank you.